Oh, she's just helping out for the evening. Those words from my daughter-in-law's mouth made me freeze with the tray of appetizers in my hands. What I discovered in the days that followed, and the documents I brought back to her perfect dinner party, changed everything forever. I'm glad you're here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. I never imagined that at 70 years old, I'd be standing in my own son's kitchen, being introduced to his wife's colleagues as the help. But there I was, wearing the apron Victoria had specifically asked me to put on, holding a silver platter of canapés I'd spent 3 hours preparing. My name is Margaret Caldwell, and I've lived in Bellingham, Washington for the past 42 years. It's a quiet coastal city nestled between the Cascade Mountains and the Salish Sea, about 90 miles north of Seattle. I raised my son, Daniel, here as a single mother after my husband passed away when Daniel was only 8 years old. Those were the hardest years of my life, but also the years that defined who I became. After losing my husband Thomas in a construction accident, I found myself alone with a young boy, a mortgage, and exactly $3,847 in our savings account. Thomas had been a good man, a loving husband and father, but he'd never believed in life insurance. He always said he was too young and healthy to worry about such things. His death proved how wrong that assumption could be. I worked 2 jobs to keep us afloat. My morning shifts were at Harborview Medical Clinic, where I worked as a receptionist and billing coordinator from 6 a.m. to 2 p.m. Then I'd rush home to make sure Daniel had a snack and help him start his homework before heading to my evening job doing bookkeeping for local businesses. I'd work from 4 p.m. until 9 or 10 p.m., depending on how much work there was. Sometimes I'd take files home and work until midnight, calculating payroll or reconciling accounts while Daniel slept in his room down the hall. I missed his school plays because I was working. I missed parent-teacher conferences because I couldn't afford to take the time off. I missed birthday parties and field trips and all the small moments that make up a childhood. But I made sure he had clean clothes, hot meals, and enough money saved for college. That was what mattered. That was what a mother did. When Daniel was accepted to the University of Washington with a partial scholarship, I cried for an hour. All those years of sacrifice had been worth it. I took out loans to cover what the scholarship didn't, and I picked up weekend shifts at the clinic to help with his living expenses. He thrived in Seattle, made the dean's list every semester, and graduated with honors in political science. Then came law school. Daniel was accepted to Seattle University School of Law, and I was so proud I thought my heart might burst. I refinanced my house to help pay for it. I sold my car and bought an older model to free up cash. I ate rice and beans most nights so I could send him money for books and study materials. "Mom, you don't have to do this," he'd tell me on our weekly phone calls. "I can take out more loans." "Nonsense," I'd say, keeping my voice cheerful, even though I was exhausted down to my bones. "What else am I going to spend my money on? You're my investment, sweetheart. You're going to do great things." And he did. Daniel graduated from law school 3rd in his class and passed the bar exam on his first try. He was hired by Morrison & Associates, a mid-sized firm in Seattle that specialized in real estate law. He was making more money in his first year than I'd made in any 5 years of my life combined. I thought we'd made it. I thought all the sacrifice had paid off, and now we could finally relax and enjoy the fruits of our labor. Then he met Victoria Chen. It was at a legal conference in Vancouver. Victoria was giving a presentation on corporate merger strategies, and Daniel was in the audience. He called me that night, his voice electric with excitement. "Mom, I just met the most incredible woman. She's brilliant, beautiful, successful. She works at Sterling and Whitmore, one of the biggest corporate law firms in the Pacific Northwest. She's a senior associate on track to make partner before she's 40. I was happy for him. Daniel had dated sporadically through law school, but nothing serious. He'd been so focused on his studies and building his career that relationships had taken a back seat. If he'd found someone he excited him, someone who shared his professional ambitions, that was wonderful. "Tell me about her," I said, settling into my worn armchair with a cup of tea. "Her name is Victoria Chen." Her family owns the Grandview Hotel chain, those luxury hotels across Washington and Oregon. Her dad started with one hotel in Portland and built it into this empire. She went to Yale for undergrad and Columbia for law school. She's incredible, Mom. I think she might be the one. Something in his voice made me pause. There was admiration there, certainly, but there was also something else. Something that sounded almost like intimidation, awe, as if he couldn't quite believe someone like before I met Victoria, interested in someone like him. She sounds accomplished, I said carefully. When do I get to meet her? Soon, I promise. We're taking things slow right now. She's incredibly busy with work. 6 months passed before I met Victoria. Daniel kept saying she was traveling for cases or working late on deals or dealing with family obligations. I started to wonder if she was real or if my son was caught up in some kind of fantasy relationship.
Finally, they came to Bellingham for Sunday brunch at my house. I spent 2 days cleaning every corner of my small home, trying to see it through the eyes of someone who'd grown up in luxury hotels. The worn carpet in the living room, the outdated kitchen cabinets, the bathroom with its chipped tile, all the things I'd learned to overlook suddenly looked shabby and inadequate. I made my best meal, pot roast with roasted vegetables, homemade rolls, and apple pie for dessert. I set the table with the good china I'd inherited from my mother, the pieces I only used for Christmas and Easter. Victoria arrived wearing clothes that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. She was beautiful in a polished, intimidating way. Perfectly styled black hair, flawless makeup, designer dress, and shoes. She looked like she'd stepped out of a fashion magazine, completely out of place in my modest dining room. "Mrs. Caldwell," she said, extending a perfectly manicured hand, "it's so nice to finally meet you. Daniel has told me so much about you." "Please call me Margaret," I said, shaking her hand. Her grip was firm and brief, the handshake of someone deciding whether professional networking. "Welcome to my home. I hope you're hungry." Brunch was awkward. Victoria picked at her food, eating tiny portions and leaving most of it on her plate. She asked polite questions about Bellingham and my work at the clinic, but I could see her checking her phone repeatedly under the table. When I mentioned how proud I was of Daniel's accomplishments, she smiled tightly. "He's done very well," she agreed, "though the real estate law field can be somewhat limiting. There's much more opportunity in corporate law, more prestige and earning potential." Daniel's face flushed. "I enjoy what I do," he said quietly. "Of course," Victoria said sleuthily. "I just think you have so much potential. You could be doing bigger things." I felt a protective surge toward my son, but I bit my tongue. This was his relationship, his choice. I couldn't interfere just because I didn't like the implication that his career wasn't impressive enough. After they left, I called my best friend Patricia, who I'd known since Daniel was in elementary school. "I don't know, Pat," I said, cradling the phone against my shoulder as I washed dishes. Something about her just felt cold, like she was evaluating everything, judging. "Maybe she was just nervous about meeting you. Meeting the parents is always stressful." "Maybe," but I couldn't shake the feeling that Victoria hadn't been nervous. She was assessing, calculating, deciding whether I fit into whatever picture she had of her future. Daniel and Victoria dated for another year before he proposed. He didn't tell me he was planning to propose, didn't ask for my blessing or my input. I found out when he posted the news on Facebook, along with photos of Victoria's enormous diamond ring. I called him immediately. "Congratulations, sweetheart. I'm so happy for you." "Thanks, Mom," he said, and I could hear the joy in his voice. "I know you two didn't quite click at first, but I really think once you get to know Victoria better, you'll love her as much as I do." "I'm sure I will," I lied. "Have you set a date?" "Next summer. Victoria wants a big wedding at the Grandview Hotel in Seattle. Her parents are handling most of the planning and the expenses." "That's generous of them," I said, trying not to feel hurt that I wouldn't be involved in planning my only child's wedding. Let me know if there's anything I can do to help. Actually, Mom, there is something. Daniel's voice became hesitant. Victoria's parents are paying for almost everything, and her guest list is pretty extensive. We're trying to keep the overall numbers manageable. Could you keep your guest list pretty small? Maybe just a few close friends? I looked around my living room, thinking of all the people who'd supported us over the years. Patricia and her husband, who'd watched Daniel when I had to work late. The neighbors who'd brought casseroles when Thomas died. The teachers who'd tutored Daniel for free. The coworkers who'd covered my shifts when Daniel was sick. How small are we talking? I asked. Maybe 5 people total, including Patricia. 5 people, out of a wedding that would apparently have over 200 guests. Of course, I heard myself say, whatever you need. The wedding was exactly what I had expected. Lavish, impersonal, and clearly designed to impress Victoria's parents' social circle. I sat in the 3rd row of the church, not the front row where mothers of the groom traditionally sit, but the 3rd row behind Victoria's extended family members. Daniel explained apologetically that Victoria's family had very specific traditions about wedding seating arrangements. At the reception, I was seated at a table with distant relatives I'd never met, far from the head table where Daniel and Victoria held court. I watched my son from across the ballroom, handsome in his tuxedo, laughing at something one of Victoria's father's business associates said. He never once looked my way. Patricia squeezed my hand under the table. She's just caught up in the moment. He's on his wedding day, she whispered. But I knew better. This was how it would be from now on. Daniel was entering Victoria's world, and I was being left behind in mine. After the wedding, things changed even more. Daniel and Victoria bought a house in the Queen Anne neighborhood of Seattle, one of the most expensive areas in the city. It was a beautiful craftsman-style home with original hardwood floors, a renovated chef's kitchen, and a view of Puget Sound. Daniel invited me to see it once, driving me through the neighborhood with obvious pride. Victoria's parents helped with the down payment as a wedding gift, he explained. Between that and both our salaries, we were able to afford something really special. The house was beautiful. It was also completely intimidating. Every piece of furniture looked expensive and uncomfortable. There were abstract paintings on the walls that I didn't understand. The kitchen had appliances I didn't know how to use. I felt like I was touring a museum, not visiting my son's home. "It's lovely," I said, meaning it even as I felt the distance between us growing wider with every room we entered. Victoria appeared from her home office, dressed in work clothes, even though it was a Saturday. "Margaret, what do you think?" "It's absolutely beautiful," I said honestly. "You two have done an amazing job." "Mostly the interior designer," Victoria said dismissively. "I don't have time for that sort of thing. Too busy with work." I nodded, not sure what to say to that. In my world, people decorated their own homes because hiring someone to do it was an unimaginable luxury. Over the next 3 years, I saw Daniel less and less. He was busy with work, Victoria was busier with hers, and Bellingham was 90 miles away, far enough that spontaneous visits weren't really possible. We settled into a pattern of monthly phone calls and quarterly visits, usually for major holidays. I drove to Seattle because Victoria said they were too busy to make the trip north. I tried to be understanding. They were building their careers, establishing their lives. This was normal. Children grew up and created their own families. I needed to adjust my expectations. But I missed my son. I missed the boy who used to tell me about his day over dinner, who'd ask my advice about problems at school, who'd hug me goodnight before bed. The man he'd become was polite but distant, always slightly distracted, always checking his phone, always aware that Victoria was waiting for him somewhere. Then, 2 weeks ago, everything changed. Daniel called on a Tuesday evening, his voice tight with stress. "Mom, I need a huge favor." "Of course, sweetheart," I said immediately, muting the television. "What do you need?" "Victoria is hosting a dinner party on Saturday night. It's incredibly important. She's trying to close a major deal with some potential clients, and the partners from her firm are coming. It's basically a make or break evening for her career." "That sounds stressful. I hope it goes well for her." "That's the thing, Mom. Her usual caterer canceled last minute. Some kind of kitchen fire at their facility. Victoria's been going crazy trying to find a replacement, but everyone good is already booked. She's working 18-hour days on this deal, and she doesn't have time to handle the food preparation on top of everything else." I felt where this was going before he said it. "You need help with the food?" "Would you be willing? I know it's a lot to ask, and it's a long drive, but you're such an amazing cook. And honestly, Mom, your food is better than anything we could get from a caterer. Please? It would mean so much to both of us." How could I say no? This was my son asking for help. This was a chance to support Victoria's career, to be useful, to show that I cared about their success, even if they didn't include me in their daily lives. "Of course I'll help," I said. "What does she need?" "I'll have Victoria email you the menu details and the guest list. There will be 12 people total. The dinner is at 7 p.m., but could you come early? Maybe around 2? That would give you time to prepare everything." "I'll be there, I promised." After we hung up, I felt a flutter of hope in my chest. This was an opportunity, a chance to show Victoria that I could be helpful, that I could fit into their world. Maybe, if I did this well, if I proved that I wasn't just some small-town woman who didn't understand their sophisticated lifestyle, things between us could improve. I was such a fool. The email from Victoria arrived the next morning. It was formal, almost clinical in its tone. "Margaret, thank you for agreeing to help with Saturday's dinner. This is a critically important evening for my career, so attention to detail is essential. Below is the menu I've selected. Appetizers: prosciutto-wrapped fig and goat cheese crostini, smoked salmon canapés with dill cream, mini beef Wellingtons. Main course: herb-crusted rack of lamb with red wine reduction, roasted Brussels sprouts with pancetta, garlic herb Duchess potatoes, arugula salad with pomegranate and candied walnuts. Dessert: individual chocolate torts with raspberry coulis. Please arrive at 2 p.m. sharp. Wear something appropriate for kitchen work. I have an apron you can use for serving. The guests will begin arriving at 6:45 p.m., so everything needs to be ready by then. This is a professional event, so I need you to be discreet and efficient. These are high-level attorneys and business people who are used to sophisticated service. Let me know if you have any questions." "Interior designer," Victoria said dismissively. "I don't have time for that sort of thing. Too busy with work." I nodded, not sure what to say to that. In my world, people decorated their own homes because hiring someone to do it was an unimaginable luxury. I spent the week preparing. I researched each dish, watching cooking videos to perfect my techniques. I practiced the presentation, arranging food on plates to look as elegant as possible. I went to 3 different specialty grocery stores in Bellingham and Seattle to find the exact ingredients Victoria had specified. The right type of goat cheese, the perfect figs, fresh herbs instead of dried. By the time Saturday arrived, I'd spent over $300 of my own money on ingredients and supplies. I didn't mind. This was my contribution to their success. I dressed carefully that morning. A nice pair of black slacks and a simple blue blouse. Professional, but not too fancy. I didn't want to look like I was trying too hard, but I also didn't want Victoria to think I didn't take this seriously. The drive from Bellingham to Seattle took 2 hours in Saturday traffic. I arrived at their Queen Anne house at exactly 2 p.m., my car loaded with grocery bags and my battered rolling cooler filled with ingredients I'd prepared at home. Daniel answered the door in jeans and a polo shirt, looking stressed and distracted. "Mom, thank you so much for doing this. You're a lifesaver." He kissed my cheek quickly and helped me carry bags into the kitchen. Victoria was nowhere to be seen.
"Where's Victoria?" I asked, setting bags on the pristine marble counter. "In her home office. She's been on conference calls all morning, preparing for tonight. She's really stressed about this, Mom. These clients represent a huge opportunity for her firm." "I understand," I said, starting to unpack ingredients. "I'll make sure everything is perfect." Daniel hovered for a moment, looking like he wanted to say something more. Then his phone buzzed, and he glanced at the screen. "I've got to take this. It's about a closing on Monday." "Thank you again, Mom. You're the best." He disappeared into his own office, leaving me alone in the kitchen. I looked around at the space. The 6-burner Wolf range, the Sub-Zero refrigerator, the marble countertops that probably cost more than my entire kitchen. Everything was perfect and pristine and completely impersonal. There were no magnets on the refrigerator, no notes stuck to the cabinets, no signs that real people lived here. I got to work. The first hour passed quickly as I fell into the familiar rhythm of cooking. I've always found peace in the kitchen. It's where I feel most competent and in control. My hands knew what to do without my brain having to direct them. Chop, sauté, season, taste. The smells of garlic and herbs filled the kitchen, and for a little while, I could almost forget the awkwardness of the situation. At 3:30, Victoria emerged from her office. She was already dressed for the evening in a sleek black cocktail dress that hugged her figure perfectly. Her makeup was flawless, her hair styled in soft waves. She looked like she should be on the cover of a magazine, not in her own kitchen hours before guests arrived. She walked through the kitchen without greeting me, examining what I'd prepared so far with a critical eye. "The crostini base is too thick," she said, picking one up and examining it. "They need to be more delicate. Cut them thinner and toast them again." I nodded, swallowing my frustration. "Of course. And make sure when you arrange them on the serving plates, they're in a circle, not rows. Circular arrangements look more sophisticated." "I'll remember that." She moved to the stove, lifting the lid on the pot where I was preparing the red wine reduction for the lamb. She inhaled, frowned slightly, then said, "This needs more time and possibly a touch of honey to balance the acidity." "I was planning to adjust the seasoning once it reduced more," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "Just make sure it's right. These clients know good food when they taste it." She started to leave, then turned back. "Oh, and Margaret, when you're serving tonight, I'll need you to wear this." She pulled a black server's apron from a drawer and handed it to me. It was plain and utilitarian, the kind professional caterers and restaurant servers wear. The kind that clearly identifies someone as staff. I stared at it, my mind struggling to process what she was asking. "Victoria, I'm happy to help serve, but I thought—" "It's just for appearances," she said quickly, not meeting my eyes. "These are very important people. Partners from my firm, potential clients worth millions. Everything needs to look professional and polished. You understand." No, I didn't understand. I understood that she wanted to make sure no one mistook me for a guest. I understood that she was embarrassed by me, by my age, by my modest background. I understood that in her mind, I was the help, and I needed to look the part. But Daniel appeared in the doorway before I could respond. "Mom, that smells amazing," he said, coming over to peek at what I was cooking. Then he saw the apron in my hands and the expression on Victoria's face. His smile faltered. "Oh." "Daniel," I said quietly, looking at my son with pleading eyes, "I don't think I should—" "Mom, please," he said, his voice soft and desperate. "It's just for tonight. Victoria's been so stressed about this dinner. Everything needs to be perfect. It's really important for her career, for her future. Can you just help us out, please?" I looked at my son, my only child, the boy I'd worked 2 jobs to raise, the man I'd refinanced my house to send to law school, and saw him choosing his wife's comfort over my dignity. "Of course," I heard myself say. "Whatever you need." Victoria's face relaxed immediately. "Thank you, Margaret. This is going to be a great evening. I can feel it." She left the kitchen, her heels clicking against the hardwood floors. Daniel gave my shoulder a grateful squeeze and followed her, already pulling out his phone to check messages. I stood alone in their expensive kitchen, holding a server's apron, and felt something inside me start to crack. But I put on the apron. What else could I do? I'd driven 2 hours, spent hundreds of dollars on ingredients, worked for hours in their kitchen. I couldn't walk away now, no matter how much I wanted to. I told myself it was just for one evening. I told myself I was being oversensitive. I told myself that professional appearances mattered in Victoria's world, and I needed to understand that. I told myself all these lies while something in my chest felt like it was dying. By 6:30, everything was ready. The appetizers were arranged on silver platters, looking like they'd come from a professional catering company. The lamb was resting, perfectly cooked to a medium rare. The torts were chilling in the refrigerator, ready to be plated with a raspberry coulis. The table was set with Victoria's wedding china, each placement precise and elegant. Victoria did a final inspection, walking through every room with the attention to detail of a general inspecting troops before battle. She adjusted a flower arrangement by 2 inches. She repositioned a wine glass that was slightly out of alignment. She straightened a napkin. "Everything looks acceptable," she said finally. It was the closest thing to praise I'd get. The doorbell rang at 6:45 p.m. exactly. The first guests had arrived. "Get the door, please," Victoria said, smoothing her dress one final time. "Take their coats and offer them drinks. The bar is set up in the living room." I took a deep breath, arranged my face into a pleasant smile, and went to open the door. The next 4 hours would be the longest and most humiliating of my entire life. The first guests to arrive were a couple in their early 50s, both dressed in expensive business attire that screamed power and success. The woman wore a tailored navy suit with diamond earrings that caught the light, and the man had on a custom-fitted charcoal suit with Italian leather shoes. I opened the door with my practiced smile, feeling the weight of the server's apron like chains around my waist. "Good evening," I said warmly. "Welcome. May I take your coats?" The woman handed me her cashmere wrap without looking at me, already scanning the interior of the house with an appraising eye. The man shrugged off his overcoat and passed it to me with barely a glance. "Victoria," the woman called out, walking past me as if I were invisible. "Darling, your home is absolutely stunning." Victoria appeared from the living room, her smile bright and genuine in a way I rarely saw directed at me. "Sandra, Martin, I'm so glad you could make it. Come in. Let me get you drinks." I stood in the entryway holding their expensive coats, waiting for someone to tell me where to put them. When no one paid attention, I quietly hung them in the hall closet and returned to the living room, where Victoria was already deep in conversation with Sandra and Martin. "Margaret, drinks, please," Victoria said without looking at me, gesturing toward the bar setup. "Sandra will have a Pinot Grigio. Martin prefers Scotch on the rocks." I nodded and moved to the bar, preparing their drinks while conversations swirled around me. More guests arrived over the next 20 minutes, all of them polished, successful-looking people in their 40s and 50s. All of them handed me their coats with barely a glance. All of them looked through me as if I were part of the furniture. Daniel had emerged from his office, now dressed in a suit and tie, playing the role of the charming host. He moved through the room, shaking hands, laughing at jokes, refilling drinks. He caught my eye once and gave me a small, grateful smile, but he didn't come over to introduce me to anyone. He didn't acknowledge me as his mother. I was the invisible woman in the black apron, moving through rooms with trays of appetizers and wine bottles, serving people who couldn't be bothered to remember I existed. "These crostini are divine," I heard one woman say to Victoria as I passed by with a tray. "Where did you get them catered from?" "Oh, I have my sources," Victoria said with a mysterious smile, not bothering to mention that I'd spent 3 hours preparing them that afternoon. I circulated through the living room, offering appetizers and refilling drinks. The conversations around me were all about business, mergers and acquisitions, corporate takeovers, real estate deals worth millions of dollars. These were people who operated in a world I couldn't even imagine, where the money they discussed in casual conversation represented more than I'd ever earned in my entire working life.
Victoria laughed, a light, carefree sound. "Oh, I didn't make it. I have someone handling all the food tonight. I'm far too busy to spend time in the kitchen." Someone. Not even a name. Just someone. I felt my hands trembling slightly as I poured the wine, but I kept my face neutral and continued moving through the room. This was fine. This was what I'd agreed to. I just needed to get through the evening. At 7:15, Victoria announced that dinner was ready, and the guests moved to the dining room. I'd set the table earlier according to Victoria's exacting specifications, the china just so, the crystal gleaming, the floral centerpiece positioned precisely in the middle. It looked like something from a magazine spread. I served the salad course first, placing each plate carefully in front of the guests. They continued their conversation without acknowledging me, discussing a major corporate merger that Victoria's firm was handling. The numbers they threw around casually, $400 million, $600 million, made my head spin. This was their normal. This was the world my son now inhabited. As I was clearing the salad plates, an elegantly dressed woman in her 60s leaned toward Victoria. "You know, Victoria, you're so lucky to have such reliable help for these events. Good service people are so hard to find these days." Victoria smiled and nodded. "Yes, it makes such a difference to have someone who can handle the details so I can focus on my guests." The woman turned to me as I reached for her plate. For the first time all evening, someone actually looked at me. Really looked at me. "You do excellent work," she said with a kind smile. "The food has been absolutely delicious." "Thank you," I managed, my voice barely above a whisper. "Are you local? I'm always looking for good caterers for my own events." Before I could respond, Victoria interjected smoothly. "Oh, she's not really available for other events. She's just helping out for the evening." Just helping out. There were those words again, and they hit me like a slap across the face. The woman nodded and turned her attention back to her conversation, the moment of human connection already forgotten. I was dismissed, erased, reduced to nothing more than temporary help that wasn't even good enough to recommend to others. I returned to the kitchen, my chest tight and my eyes burning with tears I refused to let fall. I had to plate the main course now, the herb-crusted lamb that I'd spent hours preparing, making sure every detail was perfect. My hand shook as I sliced the meat and arranged it on the plates with the roasted vegetables and Duchess potatoes. Through the doorway, I could hear the laughter and conversation from the dining room. Everyone sounded relaxed and happy, enjoying themselves. No one missed me. No one wondered who was in the kitchen preparing their food. I was completely invisible. I served the main course, placing each plate carefully in front of the guests. The lamb was cooked perfectly, a beautiful medium rare with a golden herb crust. The vegetables were arranged artfully. It was the best meal I had ever prepared. "This looks wonderful, Victoria," Martin said, cutting into his lamb. "You've really outdone yourself tonight." Victoria accepted the compliment with gracious modesty, not bothering to mention that she hadn't cooked a single thing, that every bite they were enjoying had been prepared by someone else, by someone who wasn't even worth acknowledging. I stood by the wall, waiting to see if anyone needed anything, and watched my son eat the food I'd made without once looking in my direction. He was deep in conversation with one of Victoria's partners, discussing some legal strategy I didn't understand. He laughed at something the man said, his face animated and engaged. This was the life he'd chosen. These were his people now. And I was just the woman in the background, wearing an apron, serving food to people who didn't see me as human. The breaking point came near the end of the main course. Victoria's mother, Diane Chen, made a late arrival, sweeping into the dining room in a floor-length silk dress and enough jewelry to fund a small country's economy. She was a tall, imposing woman in her late 60s, with silver hair styled in an elegant chignon and the kind of bearing that suggested she'd never been told no in her entire life. "Darling," she exclaimed, kissing the air beside Victoria's cheeks. "I'm so sorry I'm late. The symphony fundraiser ran longer than expected. You know how Gerald loves to make speeches." Victoria jumped up to greet her mother, her face lighting up with genuine pleasure. "Mother, I'm so glad you could make it. Everyone, this is my mother, Diane Chen." The guests all murmured polite greetings. Diane took the empty seat at the table that had been reserved for her, and I quickly moved to serve her a plate of the main course. "Everything looks absolutely marvelous," Diane said, surveying the table with approval. Then her eyes landed on me as I set her plate in front of me. "Oh, good. You have proper service for the evening. That makes such a difference at these kinds of events, doesn't it?" She set it to the table at large, but her eyes were still on me, assessing me the way one might assess a piece of furniture or a household appliance. "Yes, it's working out perfectly," Victoria agreed. Diane turned back to the table, already dismissing me from her attention. "You know, Victoria, your father and I were just discussing how well you're doing at the firm. The managing partners have been very complimentary about your work on the Riverside Properties deal."
I stood frozen by the wall, holding an empty serving tray as Diane continued. "They're practically certain you'll make junior partner in the next round of promotions. Can you imagine? Junior partner before 40! Your father is so proud." Victoria beamed. "I've been working toward this for years, Mother. This dinner tonight is actually part of that strategy. Several people here have influence over the partnership decisions." "Very smart," Diane approved. "Your father always says that success in law is as much about relationships as it is about legal knowledge. You're playing the game exactly right." Playing the game. That's what this was. A game. And I was just a prop in it. A piece moved around the board to create the right impression. I escaped back to the kitchen, my breathing shallow and fast. I leaned against the counter, trying to steady myself. The desserts still needed to be plated and served. I still had at least another hour of this humiliation ahead of me. "Pull yourself together, Margaret," I whispered to myself. "Just get through the evening." But as I began plating the chocolate torts, drizzling each one with raspberry coulis, I heard voices approaching from the hallway. Victoria and two of her colleagues had stepped out of the dining room, probably to let Diane settle in and take a private moment to discuss business. I should have announced myself. I should have made noise so they knew I was in the kitchen. But I stayed quiet, my hands continuing to work on the desserts while their voices drifted through the doorway. "You've done an amazing job tonight, Victoria," a man's voice said. It sounded like Martin. "The Berkshire Properties clients are practically ready to sign. Richard Chen is going to be very impressed with how you've handled this." "Thank you, Martin. I've been working on this deal for 6 months. Every detail had to be perfect." "Even hired professional help for the evening," a woman's voice added. "Sandra, very smart, shows attention to detail and sophistication. The clients notice things like that." There was a pause, and then Victoria's laugh, light and casual and utterly heartless. "Well, she's not exactly professional help, Daniel's mother actually, but she's useful when we need an extra pair of hands for these kinds of events." My hands stopped moving. The dessert spoon I was holding clattered against the plate. "Oh, really?" Sandra sounded amused. "I had no idea. She seems very competent." "She is," Victoria agreed, "and she works for free, which is even better. Daniel asked her to help out, and of course she jumped at the chance. She doesn't have much else going on in her life up in Bellingham." They laughed. All three of them laughed like it was the funniest joke they'd heard the whole evening. Martin's voice came through clearly. "Well, whatever works. My mother-in-law would never agree to something like this. She'd probably throw the food at me." "The key is making them feel needed," Victoria said, and I could hear the calculated coldness in her voice. "Margaret has this whole martyrdom complex about sacrificing for Daniel. Let her feel useful, let her feel like she's helping, and she'll do whatever you ask. It's actually quite convenient." More laughter. Cruel, casual laughter about my pain, about my love for my son, about everything I sacrificed to give Daniel the opportunities that had led him to this moment. Sandra spoke again.
Just be careful she doesn't get too comfortable. These things can sometimes backfire if they start expecting to be treated like actual guests. Oh, don't worry, Victoria said dismissively. Margaret knows her place. She might not like it, but she knows it. She won't cause problems because she's too afraid of losing access to Daniel. It's actually rather sad when you think about it. I grabbed the edge of the counter to steady myself. My vision had gone blurry, and I realized I was crying. Silent tears streaming down my face while my body shook with suppressed sobs. This is what my daughter-in-law thought of me. This is how she saw my love for my son. As a weakness to be exploited, as a tool to be used, as something sad and pathetic. And Daniel, my Daniel, who I raised alone, who I sacrificed everything for, had he brought me here knowing this would happen? Had he asked me to put on this apron, to serve his wife's guests, to play this role? Did he know? Did he understand what Victoria really thought of me? The voices were moving away now, heading back toward the dining room. I heard Victoria say something else, but I couldn't make out the words over the rushing in my ears. I looked down at the chocolate torts I'd been preparing, individual desserts with their raspberry coulis and fresh mint garnish, each one a small work of art. I'd made them with care, wanting everything to be perfect for this important evening. For people who thought I was pathetic, for people who laughed at my martyrdom complex, for my son who had chosen this life, these people, this woman who saw me as nothing more than free labor. Something inside me shattered. Not broke, shattered into a million tiny pieces that could never be put back together in the same way. But I finished plating the desserts because what else could I do? I'd come this far, I'd debased myself this thoroughly, I might as well see it through to the end.
I returned to the kitchen and stood at the sink, gripping the edge of the counter, breathing in and out, trying to hold myself together for just a little longer. The guests stayed for another hour, moving back to the living room for after-dinner drinks and conversation. I served coffee and cleared dessert plates and refilled wine glasses. I was a ghost moving through their gathering, present but not really there. At 10:30, the guests finally started to leave. I stood by the door, returning coats and accepting absent-minded thanks from people who still didn't really see me. Victoria worked the room, making final connections, securing promises of follow-up meetings, leveraging every moment of social capital she'd built during the evening. Daniel walked the last guests out, his arm around one of the senior partners, already discussing Monday morning schedule at the office. And then, finally, they were gone. The house fell silent, except for the ticking of the expensive clock in the hallway and the distant hum of the refrigerator. I stood in the middle of the living room, surrounded by empty glasses and crumpled napkins and the debris of an evening that had broken something fundamental inside me. Victoria kicked off her heels and sank into the sofa with a satisfied sigh. That went perfectly, absolutely perfectly. The clients were impressed, the partners were engaged, and I'm almost certain I'll get the promotion. Daniel joined her on the sofa, loosening his tie. You were amazing tonight, Vic. Really, you had everyone eating out of your hand. Well, I've been planning this for weeks, Victoria said. Every detail mattered. They sat there, comfortable and relaxed, discussing their success, while I stood in my server's apron, invisible once again. I should have said something. I should have confronted them right then about what I'd overheard, about how they'd used me, about the casual cruelty of their laughter. But I was too tired, too broken, too overwhelmed by the evening's cumulative humiliation. Mom, you can head out whenever you're ready, Daniel called over to me, not getting up from the sofa. Thanks again for all your help tonight. You really saved us. Saved them? Yes, I'd saved them.
I'd saved them from having to pay for professional catering. I'd saved them from the inconvenience of preparing their own food. I'd saved them from having to treat me like a human being with feelings and dignity. I should clean up first, I heard myself say. The kitchen. Don't worry about it, Victoria interrupted, scrolling through her phone. We'll deal with it tomorrow. You've done enough for one evening. Enough. Yes, I'd done more than enough. I'd done far more than anyone should ever have to do. I took off the server's apron with shaking hands and folded it carefully, setting it on the kitchen counter. I gathered my purse and my coat from the hall closet. I walked to the front door on legs that felt like they might give out at any moment. "Good night, Mom," Daniel called from the living room. "Drive safe. I'll call you next week." Next week? He'd call me next week as if nothing had happened, as if this evening had been perfectly normal and acceptable. I opened the door and stepped out into the cool Seattle night. It was nearly 11 p.m., which meant I wouldn't get home to Bellingham until after 1 a.m. I'd be driving 2 hours in the dark, exhausted and emotionally shattered, because I'd agreed to help my son. As I walked to my car, I heard the door close behind me. No one came out to make sure I got to my car safely. No one waved goodbye. The house went dark except for the living room lights where Daniel and Victoria were still sitting, probably already moving on to other topics, other concerns, already forgetting the evening and the woman who'd made it possible. I sat in my car for a long moment before starting the engine, staring at their perfect house and their perfect neighborhood. Behind those walls lived the son I'd raised, the man I'd sacrificed everything for. But that man was gone now, replaced by someone I barely recognized, someone who could watch his mother be treated like hired help and say nothing, someone who could participate in her humiliation and call it helping out. The drive home was a blur. I cried so hard at times that I had to pull over onto the shoulder, my body shaking with sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep and primal. All those years of sacrifice, all those nights working 2 jobs, all those times I'd chosen his needs over mine, this was where it had led. To a son who let his wife laugh at my martyrdom complex, to an evening where I'd been used and dismissed and erased. I got home at 1:30 a.m. My small house felt different somehow. Smaller, maybe, or just sadder. I looked around at my worn furniture, my outdated kitchen, my modest possessions, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel ashamed of them. This was mine. I'd worked for every piece of it. No one had given it to me, and no one could take it away. I made myself a cup of tea and sat at my kitchen table, still wearing the clothes I'd worn to serve Victoria's guests. My feet ached. My back ached. My heart ached. But as I sat there in the quiet of my own home, something began to shift. The grief and humiliation started to transform into something else, something harder, something cold and clear. I wasn't going to do this anymore. I wasn't going to be the pathetic woman with the martyrdom complex that let herself be used because she was afraid of losing access to her son. I was done being invisible. I was done being just someone helping out. I was done pretending that this was normal or acceptable or something a mother should tolerate for the sake of family peace. It was time to find out what else Victoria and Daniel had been hiding. It was time to understand exactly what kind of life they'd built on my sacrifice and my labor and my willingness to be dismissed.
In somewhere in their perfect house, I was certain there were papers, documents, evidence of something that Victoria would very much prefer stayed hidden. I'd been paying attention tonight, even while being ignored. I'd seen Victoria's briefcase in her office, papers spread across her desk. I'd noticed the way she and her colleagues had discussed business deals with just a little too much secrecy, a little too much careful wording. Victoria thought I was useful. She thought I was pathetic. She thought I knew my place and would stay there. She was about to learn how wrong she was. Monday morning, I would start making some phone calls. I would start asking some questions. I would start looking into exactly what kind of business Victoria Chen was really conducting. Because something in my gut told me that a woman who could treat her mother-in-law with such calculated cruelty wasn't limiting her ethical violations to family matters. And when I found what I was looking for, I would return to that perfect house in that perfect neighborhood, and I would show them all that the pathetic old woman in the server's apron was far more capable than they'd ever imagined. I finished my tea and went to bed, but I didn't sleep. My mind was already working, already planning, already preparing for what came next. The evening of humiliation was over, but the real story was just beginning. Sunday morning arrived with gray Seattle rain and the kind of bone-deep exhaustion that comes from a sleepless night. I'd finally dozed off around 4 a.m., only to wake 2 hours later with my mind already racing through the events of the previous evening. I made coffee and sat at my kitchen table, staring at my phone. I needed to talk to Daniel. I needed him to understand what had happened, to acknowledge that the way Victoria had treated me, the way he had allowed me to be treated, was wrong. I called him at 7 a.m. The phone rang 4 times before going to voicemail. I tried again. Same result. On the 3rd attempt, Daniel finally answered, his voice thick with sleep. "Mom, it's 7 in the morning. Is everything okay?" "I need to talk to you about last night," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. There was a rustling sound, probably Daniel sitting up in bed. "Oh, yeah, listen, Mom, I'm really sorry we didn't get a chance to properly thank you before you left. Victoria and I were both exhausted. But seriously, you saved us. The dinner was amazing." "Daniel, Victoria told her guests I was just helping out. She made it sound like I was hired help instead of your mother." Silence on the other end. Then, "Mom, I think you might be reading too much into this. Victoria was just trying to keep the evening professional." "She told them I worked for free," I said, my voice starting to shake. "I overheard her, Daniel. She was laughing with her colleagues about how I have a martyrdom complex, about how I'll do whatever you ask because I'm afraid of losing access to you." More silence. Longer this time. "You overheard a private conversation?" Daniel's voice had changed, becoming defensive. "Mom, look, sometimes people say things in private that sound worse out of context." The conversation deteriorated from there. Daniel made excuses. He minimized my feelings. He suggested I was being oversensitive. And then Victoria took the phone. "Margaret, I think the real issue here is that you're not comfortable with the role you played last night. You feel like you weren't appreciated enough. But mature adults help others without needing constant validation. They don't need to be the center of attention." She called me childish. She called me selfish. She accused me of playing the martyr and using my sacrifices as leverage against Daniel. Every word was a knife cutting into me. And Daniel, my son, the boy I'd raised alone, the man I'd sacrificed everything for, he agreed with her. He suggested we take a few weeks of space so I could get perspective. When I hung up the phone, I felt like something fundamental had broken inside me. But beneath the grief and hurt, something else was stirring. Something harder and colder. If Victoria could be that cruel, that calculating in her personal life, what was she like in her professional life? I spent the rest of Sunday and all day Monday doing research. I started with Victoria's law firm, Sterling and Whitmore, and found an article from 3 months ago about the firm being investigated for potential conflicts of interest in a regional development deal. Victoria's name appeared in the article. I dug deeper.
searching public records and property transfers. What I found was troubling. Victoria's name appeared as a registered agent for multiple LLCs involved in real estate transactions. Transactions that coincidentally aligned with cases her law firm had handled. By Tuesday, I had a theory. Victoria was using insider information from her legal work to profit personally from real estate deals. It was fraud, simple and plain. But I needed proof. I remembered Victoria's home office from the dinner party. I'd seen her briefcase full of files, papers spread across her desk. Daniel had given me a house key 2 years ago for emergencies. This felt like an emergency. Wednesday morning, I drove to Seattle. I'd confirmed through casual inquiries that both Daniel and Victoria would be at work. The house would be empty. My hands shook as I used the key to enter through the side door. The house was silent. I made my way to Victoria's office, pulled out my phone, and started photographing everything I could find. And then I found it. A file labeled Riverside Properties, Private. Inside were emails showing Victoria discussing property purchases weeks before her firm filed rezoning applications, financial records showing money moving between her personal accounts and various LLCs, a handwritten note that said, "Ensure rezoning approved before executing Phase 2 sales."
It was all there. Evidence of fraud, insider trading, ethical violations. Victoria had made at least $800,000 in illegal profits over the past 2 years. I was photographing the last document when I heard a car door close outside. My heart stopped. I looked out the window and saw Victoria's Mercedes in the driveway. She was home early, talking on her phone as she walked toward the front door. I had maybe 30 seconds. I quickly closed the file, put it back exactly where I'd found it, and closed the desk drawer. Then I walked out of the office and headed toward the front door, hoping to pretend I'd just arrived. But Victoria appeared in the hallway and froze when she saw me. "Margaret," she said, ending her phone call, "what are you doing in my house?" I tried to lie, to say I'd brought papers for Daniel, but Victoria saw through me immediately. Her eyes moved to her office door, then back to my face. "You were in my office," she said. It wasn't a question. "I was looking for—" "Don't lie to me. You were snooping." Her voice was cold. "Looking for what, exactly?" I stood up straighter, letting my fear transform into anger. "Looking for evidence of what you really are. And I found it. Riverside Properties, the rezoning fraud, the insider trading. I found all of it." Victoria's composure cracked for just a moment, real fear flickering across her face. Then she laughed, cold and bitter. "You have no idea what you're talking about. Those are perfectly legitimate business investments. Then why hide them? Why label them private? Did you take files from my office? Because that would be theft, Margaret." "I didn't take anything," I said, pulling out my phone, "but I have photographs. Lots of them." Victoria went white. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then her expression changed into something calculating and cold. "I see. And what do you plan to do with these photographs?" "It depends on whether you're willing to acknowledge what you did to me, on whether you're willing to show some basic human decency." Victoria actually laughed. "You broke into my home, violated my privacy, stole confidential information, and you want to lecture me about decency? Here's what's going to happen. You're going to delete every photograph right now, give me Daniel's key, and leave. Or I call the police and have you arrested for breaking into my home." "You can't." "I absolutely can. Make your choice, Margaret." I understood she meant it. She would have me arrested. But I'd prepared for this. I'd set up my phone to automatically back up photos to cloud storage. Even as I made a show of deleting the images from my phone, they still existed in a hidden folder Victoria didn't know about. "The key," Victoria demanded. I handed it over. "Now get out.
And Margaret, if you ever tell anyone about what you think you saw, I'll destroy you. I'll file charges for today's break-in. I'll sue you for defamation. I'll make sure Daniel never speaks to you again. Do you understand? I understand, I said quietly. As I stepped outside, Victoria spoke one last time. You should be grateful for the life Daniel has built, but instead you're bitter and jealous and small. That's why you'll always be on the outside looking in. She closed the door in my face. I drove 2 blocks before I had to pull over, my hands shaking too badly to continue. But beneath the fear, I felt something else. Determination. I still had the photographs, backed up where Victoria didn't know to look. She thought she'd won. She was wrong. Over the next week, I worked carefully and methodically. I researched legal ethics violations and attorney misconduct procedures. I backed up the photographs to multiple locations. I wrote detailed documentation of everything I'd found. And I made copies. Lots of copies. Then I started making calls. First, I contacted the Washington State Bar Association. I explained that I had evidence of an attorney engaging in fraud and conflicts of interest. I sent them the photographs anonymously, along with my detailed timeline of Victoria's activities. Second, I contacted the Seattle Times investigative journalism desk. I told them I had evidence of a major law firm attorney using insider information for personal profit. I sent them everything. Third, I sent copies to the managing partners at Sterling and Whittemore. They deserve to know what one of their rising stars was doing with confidential client information. I did all of this anonymously, using a burner email account and sending documents through secure file transfer services. Victoria would suspect me, certainly, but she couldn't prove anything, and by the time she figured out what was happening, it would be too late. The response was faster than I expected. Within 3 days, the Bar Association opened a formal investigation into Victoria's conduct. Within a week, the Seattle Times published a front-page story about ethical violations in Seattle's top law firms, with Sterling and Whittemore prominently featured. The article didn't name Victoria specifically. Journalistic ethics prevented that before formal charges were filed. But it detailed the exact type of fraud she'd been committing. And within 2 weeks, Victoria was placed on administrative leave from her firm, pending the outcome of the investigation. Daniel called me on a Tuesday afternoon, his voice tight with stress and anger. Mom, did you have anything to do with what's happening to Victoria? What's happening to Victoria? I asked calmly. Don't play dumb. The investigation, the newspaper articles, her firm putting her on leave. She told me you broke into her house, that you went through her files. Did you report her to the Bar Association? Did I break into your house? No, Daniel. I used the key you gave me. And yes, I went through her files. I found evidence that your wife is the criminal. She's not a criminal. Those are legitimate business investments that are being mischaracterized. Daniel, she was using confidential information from her legal work to profit personally from real estate deals. That's fraud. That's insider trading. That's theft from her clients who trusted her to represent their interests. You had no right.
I had every right. My voice rose despite my intention to stay calm. After the way she treated me, after the way you let her treat me, I had every right to find out what kind of person she really is. And you know what I discovered? She's exactly the kind of person who would laugh about exploiting someone's love for their child. Her cruelty to me wasn't an aberration, Daniel. It's who she is. If this investigation destroys her career, it's on you, Daniel said, his voice cold. I hope you can live with that. I can live with it just fine, I said. Can you live with the fact that you chose a criminal over your mother? That you let her humiliate me and then called me dramatic for having feelings about it? I think we're done here, Daniel said. Yes, I agreed. I think we are. He hung up. I stared at my phone, waiting to feel regret or grief. Instead, I felt free. 3 months later, the full scope of Victoria's fraud became public. The Bar Association filed formal charges. The Seattle Times published a follow-up article naming her specifically. Sterling at Whitmore fired her and launched their own internal investigation to determine if other attorneys had engaged in similar conduct. Victoria faced disbarment, criminal charges, and civil lawsuits from clients whose confidential information she'd exploited. Her perfect life, built on fraud and manipulation, collapsed completely. I didn't take pleasure in her destruction, but I didn't regret it either. Daniel stopped speaking to me entirely. I had expected that. What surprised me was how okay I was with it. The son I'd raised wouldn't have chosen a criminal over his mother. The man Daniel had become wasn't someone I recognized anymore, and maybe that meant we didn't belong in each other's lives. But then, 4 months after Victoria's career imploded, my doorbell rang on a Saturday morning. I opened the door to find Daniel standing on my porch, looking older and more tired than I had ever seen him. His expensive suit was gone, replaced with jeans and a sweater. His hair needed cutting, his eyes were red-rimmed. "Can I come in?" he asked, quietly. I stepped aside without a word. We sat in my small living room, the same room where I'd raised him, where I'd helped him with homework and taught him to ride a bike, and celebrated his acceptance to law school. The room he'd outgrown when he married Victoria and moved to Queen Anne. "Victoria and I are getting divorced," Daniel said, finally. "The legal bills for her defense, the civil lawsuits, the lost income. We can't afford the house anymore. We can't afford anything. And honestly, I can't look at her anymore without seeing what she is." I nodded, but didn't speak. "I've been thinking a lot about that dinner party, about what we asked you to do, about how we treated you. Mom, He stopped, swallowing hard. "I was so caught up in Victoria's world, in wanting to fit into that life, that I lost sight of what actually mattered." "You let her put me in a servant's apron," I said quietly. "You watched her erase me in front of her colleagues. And when I told you how much it hurt, you called me dramatic for having feelings about it." "I know." Tears were running down his face now. "I know, and I can't take it back. I can't undo what we did. But Mom, I need you to know that I see it now. I see what she was, what she did to you, what I let her do to you. Do you see what she was doing professionally? The fraud, the theft, the betrayal of her clients?" Daniel nodded miserably. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. When the investigation started, when the evidence came out, I was shocked. I'd believed her when she said it was all legitimate. But now," he wiped his eyes, "now I've seen all the documentation. She was stealing, Mom. Stealing from clients who trusted her, from her firm, from everyone. And she was so good at lying that I never suspected." "She was good at a lot of things. Lying, manipulating, making people feel small." "I'm so sorry." Daniel's voice was barely a whisper. "I'm so sorry for all of it, for choosing her over you, for letting her treat you that way, for calling you dramatic when you were just trying to tell me the truth. You deserved so much better from me." I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw someone I recognized again. Not the man in the expensive suit who'd watched his wife humiliate his mother, but the boy I'd raised, the person underneath all of Victoria's influence. I reported her to the Bar Association. I'm the one who sent them the evidence. I'm the one who destroyed her career. Daniel nodded slowly. "I figured. Victoria was convinced it was you, though she could never prove it. Are you angry?" He thought about it for a long moment. "No. I was at first, but Mom, you were right about her, about everything. You saw who she really was when I was too blind to see it. If you hadn't exposed her fraud, she would have kept doing it. She would have hurt more people, and I would have stayed married to her, probably helping enable her without even knowing it. She threatened to have me arrested. She made me give you back your house key." "I know," she told me. "She was terrified you'd go public with what you'd found." Daniel leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "Mom, need to know. Can you ever forgive me?
For letting her treat you that way? For not standing up for you? For calling you dramatic when you were just trying to tell me the truth? I studied my son's face, really looked at him, and saw someone I recognized again. Not the man in the expensive suit who'd watched his wife humiliate his mother, but the boy I'd raised, the person underneath all of Victoria's influence. I don't know, I said honestly. What happened hurt me more than anything else in my life. Having my only child watch me be humiliated and do nothing, that broke something inside me.
I understand, Daniel said, standing up. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry, that I see what I did, and that regardless of whether you can forgive me, you were right about everything. He walked to the door, then paused and turned back. The house is going into foreclosure. Victoria's legal bills took everything. I'm moving into an apartment in Bellingham next month. It's small, nothing fancy, but it's close to you. If you ever want to talk or have coffee or just... I'd like to try to rebuild what we had, if you'll let me. After he left, I sat in my living room for a long time, thinking about everything that had happened. The humiliation of that dinner party felt like it had occurred in another lifetime, to another person. The woman who'd worn that server's apron wouldn't have broken into someone's house or exposed their crimes or risked arrest to find the truth. But that woman was gone. She'd been destroyed by cruelty and manipulation and the casual dismissal of her love and sacrifice. In her place was someone harder, someone who fought back, someone who refused to be invisible. I thought about Daniel's apology, his tears, his genuine remorse. I thought about the divorce papers he was probably filing, the life he'd built crumbling around him. I thought about the fact that he was moving to Bellingham to be close to me. I didn't forgive him. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Completely. What had happened couldn't be undone or erased with an apology, no matter how sincere. But maybe, eventually, we could build something new. Not the relationship we had before. That was gone forever. But something different. Something based on mutual respect rather than expectation. Something where I was seen as a person rather than a resource to be used. Maybe. 6 months later. 6 months after Daniel's apology, I received an interesting piece of mail. It was a check from Sterling and Whitmore's Client Restitution Fund, along with a letter explaining that as someone who'd contributed to the exposure of Victoria Chen's fraud, I was entitled to a reward under their whistleblower policy. The amount was $50,000. I stared at the check for a long time, thinking about everything that had led to this moment. The humiliation of that dinner party, the discovery of Victoria's fraud, the calculated risk of exposing her, the loss of my relationship with Daniel, and the slow, painful rebuilding of it. I used part of the money to finally update my kitchen, the kitchen where I'd cooked that elaborate dinner for Victoria's guests, the kitchen where I'd raised Daniel on a shoestring budget. I used more of it to establish a small scholarship fund at the community college where I'd taken night classes years ago, back when Daniel was young and I was trying to improve my job prospects. And I used the rest to take Patricia on a trip to Italy, something we'd talked about doing for 20 years but never could afford. As I walked through the streets of Rome with my best friend, eating gelato and laughing at our terrible attempts at Italian, I thought about the woman I'd been a year ago. The woman who'd worn that server's apron and let herself be treated as invisible. The woman who believed that sacrifice and service and putting yourself last was the same thing as love. That woman was gone, and I didn't miss her. In her place was someone harder, someone who fought back, someone who refused to be invisible. My phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. "Hope Italy is amazing, Mom. Can't wait to hear all about it when you get back. Love you." I smiled and texted back, "Love you too. See you in 2 weeks." It wasn't a perfect happy ending. Daniel and I still had work to do, trust to rebuild, wounds to heal. Victoria was facing disbarment and possible criminal charges.
a cautionary tale about what happens when ambition and greed override ethics and humanity.
But as I stood in front of the Trevi fountain, throwing in a coin and making a wish, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not because everything had worked out perfectly, but because I'd stood up for myself, because I'd refused to stay invisible, because I'd found the courage to expose the truth, even when it cost me. And because I'd discovered that sometimes the most important papers you can bring to a dinner party aren't the ones people forgot. They're the ones that prove who someone really is, underneath all the expensive clothes and perfect manners and sophisticated lies. Victoria had called me pathetic, jealous, and small. She'd tried to make me believe that my love for my son was a weakness to be exploited. But in the end, it was my love for my son and my love for myself that gave me the strength to fight back. And that was something no one could ever take away from me. Thank you for following Margaret's story until the end. What would you have done in her position? Have you ever been in a situation where someone tried to make you feel invisible or less than? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And remember, you are never just helping out. You matter. Your feelings are valid. And you deserve to be treated with dignity and respect. Always. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share if this story resonated with you. Your support means everything.